In this video, we're going to talk about the development of Sonata Allegro form and look at the common practice era to see what basic ideas are, predecessor to this most important form that develops at the very end of the Baroque era in what is called pre-classical works of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, J.S. Bach's eldest son, who survived, who was very important in the North German Infansamkeit, and so he was regarded by Mozart. He said, he is the father, we are the children, and so forth. He really viewed him as being the one who, generates all of these ideas that come to full fruition with Haydn and Mozart, and then Beethoven has that as a starting point. And so sonata form is something that's extensively developed in the classical era. And then it's probably the form that's most closely identified with Beethoven's works. And Beethoven's works then are the basis for 19th century Romanticism. And so it's really important to kind of have a feeling for where sonata form comes from and what it is then that Beethoven achieves in this form. And so there are some basic ideas that I want to talk about with Okay, so you already know what the basic formula is for this. It's talked about it many, many times in several different classes. But with the development of the major-minor system, the tonality at the beginning of the 17th century, with the use of figure-based notation, which indicates specific chord progressions, and the construction of triads and seven chords that are built with the interval of the third. These ideas are all new. They're described by Rameau in his landmark, treatise on harmony in 1722. And so there are some basic elements that are associated with tonality, this tertian harmonic system, that serve as a basis for form. And one of the most important things is just the idea of tonal architecture. Tonal architecture is just the basic idea of organizing the work according to a tonal plan. And so the harmonic style that develops is one that allows for the idea of modulation. And then big works are based on just tonic, dominant, tonic kind of overall, key relationship. So, let's put here, tonal architecture is basing the organization of a musical work on a basic harmonic plan. So one of the most basic is tonic, dominant, tonic. That's the basis for binary form, which is the direct form, and especially rounded binary form, is directly then what serves as the basis upon which Sonata Allegro then just kind of embellishes on that and just takes that basic idea it makes it just much bigger and adds more kind of components within that basic idea of, binary form and rounded binary form. So that's one idea of just that basic idea of having a, harmonic plan. All right. Second idea has to do just with the ternary element. So ternary is basically ABA. So that idea of, statement, and then a digression, contrasting passage, restatement. So you see that in something like the Da capo aria from the Baroque. And we're also going to see this then with rounded binary, which I'll talk about here in a second. But that's another idea. And then this form that's associated with Baroque dances is binary form, which doesn't have an A theme and a B theme, but it basically has two sections. And it's basically taking an idea and continuously developing that one idea in those two sections. So you remember that term, doctrine of affections? That's a Baroque idea. So one theme that's continuously developed, and this is the basic harmonic plan, the tonal architecture of binary form. These ideas of two sections that are enclosed with double bars and repeats that have this overall tonic dominant, and then the second half is the reverse, dominant tonic, or if it's in minor, go into the relative major. That becomes the basic background for Sonata Allegro. So Sonata Allegro is based on binary form, and it just grows from there. So rounded binary is basically going to take this idea, and when it returns to tonic in the second half, then it's going to restate just a portion of the opening. So it has the recapitulation idea as well. And it may only be like the first, measure or so, or two, that it will restate from the beginning, then it'll spin off into something else. So it's not a full-blown recapitulation like what you're going to see in sonata form, but it's that basic idea of restating something. And tonic in the second half, that's the key there. I'll put here restates a portion. All right, so one of the things then that Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach does, and other composers like Stamitz in Mannheim, is the idea of having the element of contrast, of not having this doctrine of affections element, and instead having a contrasting B theme. That is something then that becomes a dramatic element of having that contrast of an opening A theme, which might be more animated and brilliant, and then a B theme that's more lyrical. And so it's got a lot of change of character there. And that's one of the characteristics of CPE Bach's sensitive style, is that element of contrast. So, that was sensitive style, C.P.E. Bach, and Stamitz, who's writing early symphonies. And then that's then what happens, is that this new structure emerges, and it really became popular. Okay, now, when you are analyzing Sonata Allegro movements, some things that you look for. In the exposition, look for 4 different places to identify. It could start with an introduction. It doesn't have to. That's an optional auxiliary member, as you know. So that, you can consider that. Does it start with an introduction or not? But I'll put here intro. It could have a contrasting tempo. It could be in a contrasting key. It could be in the opposite mode, for instance. But for sure, the term allegro has to do with the fact that this is associated with the opening fast movement of a, quote, sonata cycle work, like a symphony, and so forth. So then the exposition is going to have an A theme, and we're going to use letters. There are some theorists that use primary theme, secondary theme, and so forth. But we're going to use A theme, B theme. And that'll be a tonic. And all of the motivic ideas that are presented in the opening tonic area of the exposition, then you can list A1, or A2 for the different motives. You can put a little bracket over the motive if you're going to identify it, And generally, remember, a motive is something that is going to be developed, sequenced. It's going to be a thematic building block. So that's important in, discussing the way that a composer, manipulates and works with the material. So, it gives it a sense of, coherence. So all the opening ideas in tonic, you'll label with A1, A2, and so forth. Okay, then the passage that then is the passage that is going to modulate and very important that you're looking for the point that it modulates and then it cadences in that second key. And you're always looking for either dominant if the overall key is major or relative major if the overall key is minor. You could possibly have it go to the minor dominant if the overall key is minor. That's not unusual, but it's not as typical as going to the relative major for the second key in a minor work. All right, so you're looking for A, that's the first section. You're looking for the transition, that's the second section. It's going to cadence. Don't label it as B theme if it hasn't gotten to the key that you're expecting. Remember that from rondo form. All right, B theme, then dominant or relative major. Typically, B theme is more lyrical. Not always, but for sure more than half the time. You'll see words like dolce to indicate character change. And so things that are lyrical are usually more stepwise. So lyrical is something that's vocal. And it would be less animated rhythmically, so more sustained rhythmic values, so longer notes in general. Softer. Usually something that's dolce is not going to be fortissimo. And so that idea is presented. And then you'll have some closing material. Very often it returns to the more animated, or even if this is more lyrical, the closing is very often, louder and more brilliant. It brings the exposition to a real, brilliant conclusion. So if it doesn't do that, then that's something you can comment on, and you can find lots of examples where it doesn't. But in the classical era, then you would have double bars and repeats. So again, this is from binary structure that it evolved from. The overall key center of tonic to dominant is from binary, or to relative major. So you're looking for these 4 spots, okay? So try to label those 4 spots. Then, the development. In general, if the exposition is 1.0, this is like 0.5 to 0.67. It's not that precise, but half to 2/3 the length. In other words, not longer than the exposition. So this will be a shorter section. It is the most unpredictable as far as exactly what's going to happen. So one thing you are expecting to happen is that it will develop themes that you heard in the exposition. So themes or motives, that means that you might have a lot of sequential writing. And then the other characteristic is that harmonically it is unpredictable as far as exactly what key it's going to be in. It's going to modulate through closely related keys if it's Mozart or Haydn. Beethoven starts to get to more distant keys. Then they continue that idea in the 19th century. But I'll put it closely related because we're talking about this classical form, so Mozart and Haydn, early Beethoven. So, but you don't know exactly what keys it'll go through, exactly how long this will be. In general, this is a homophonic form. If you're going to see polyphonic writing, most typically it'll take place in the development section. And that's another way of creating contrast, is to have just, some motivic ideas that are combined polyphonically. So that could happen. Anytime you have counterpoint in a homophonic form, you should point it out. That's something that's not expected, and it's something that you should comment on. All right. The very final passage is the retransition. The retransition, whether the overall key is major or whether it's minor, is going to be focused on that 5/7. Some things that you can look for that are associated with this. A prolongation of the dominant. So prolongation of that 5/7 harmony. You can have things like a dominant pedal tone, that would be something that would be a good reason for identifying the retransition at a particular point, because that's where a dominant pedal tone begins. And then it could continue for several measures, It really builds tension because you're expecting it to resolve to tonic and release tension, and that's the basic psychological effect.